Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today, we're going to share deep woods horror stories. First story. I found a live infant buried in the woods. It started during the night. Around 3, I think. An inscrutable sound at first, one that my tired mind failed to make sense of. Something faint but shrill. Sporadic. Something that I was sure I didn't like hearing. Sitting up in the bed, I looked over at Elise, her skin smooth under the moonlight, sleeping calm, soundlessly. Even if the source of the noise had been right downstairs, it would have taken a while for her to stir. Fortunate for her. At any given moment, my own slumber was dangling by a thread, susceptible to termination at the slightest creak. I suppose it works out well for the both of us. Moving slowly and quietly, I slipped out the bed and made my way downstairs. Then I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, straining my ears, listening intently. Silence. Maybe in my groggy state, I'd just been hearing things. It wouldn't have been the first time. Knowing that I wasn't going back to sleep anytime soon, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and decided to sit for a while. The air was cool, windless, and just barely warm enough for me to be comfortable in my t-shirt and boxers. The moon seemed to cast a deep, blue glow over the grass and dirt before being smothered by the darkness of the woods beyond. It had become oddly quiet, serene, if I had to use a word to describe it. We'd arrived yesterday for our annual excursion in the woods. The cabin actually used to belong to my brother, Kevin, who'd essentially given it away to me some years ago, citing some strange neighbors that were weirding him out at the time. I guess they moved out, because during the weeks we've spent here, we don't see anybody at all until we make a drive out to the mountains or the lake. I know there's some cabins not too far away from us, but from what I can tell, they're vacant. I finished my beer and prepared to make my way back up to the bedroom when I heard it again. That shrill, uncomfortable sound. I sat back down and listened hard. Again, it came sporadically. Sometimes it'd last for 10, maybe 15 seconds continuously. Sometimes it'd come in shorter bursts. Crying, I realized. And if it wasn't that, then I didn't know what it could have been. I listened for a long time and eventually concluded that it had to be coming from the woods, and at that point, a bad idea popped into my head. If Kevin wasn't yanking my chain about those neighbors, then perhaps there was cause for concern here. I went back inside the cabin, put on some sweatpants and a jacket, and tucked my pistol away in them, just in case. I looked at Elise one last time before heading out. The woods were cold, still, eerie. At times I could catch clouds of my breath swirling in the beam of my flashlight. Was this a bad idea? Likely it was. But at the same time, there was something exciting about it. The adrenaline slowly building as the sound got louder. Besides, I felt safe enough. I'm a marksman, but I can still shoot. A few minutes later, and the sound became unmistakable. That's when I froze up, feeling the cold sweat prickling my skin and my breaths heavy against the night air. I shook my head, mumbling to myself, what the hell? It was a baby crying, and it sounded muffled. I walked slowly forward. Soon I found myself standing over a spot haphazardly piled with dirt, and the crying was loud as ever. I looked carefully around me before I started digging, trying hard not to think too deeply about what I was doing or what I was hearing. I read somewhere it was best to let the shock come to you in gradual waves. That strategy worked up until I saw its face, and that's when I had to choke back a breath. It was so small, its minute features twisted into a grimace in the sparse moonlight. I took a deep breath and dug the rest of it out. For a while I just stared at it, and not knowing what else to do, I carried it back to the cabin, doing whatever I could to try and soothe it during the walk. Elise woke up some minutes later after it wouldn't stop crying. When she came down, I didn't even notice her. All I could do was continue staring, pale and tiny, specks of wet dirt still clinging to its skin even though I tried to wipe it all away. "Anthony, what the hell?" was the first thing she said. I explained it to her. At first I could tell that she didn't believe me, but then I guess she realized that there would have been no reason for me to lie to her. Not about something like this. Immediately, we drew it a bath, and that's when I got a good look at its eyes. I'd never seen anything like them before. Its irises were a deep red orange, like lava. It even had small streaks and spots of black throughout. For a while after we thought about what to do, we had no baby food in the cabin, and we both didn't have the faintest clue how to begin to take care of it. Given the fact that it had been buried in cold, wet dirt for who knows how long meant it was probably sick as well. At the very least, it had stopped crying, though I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. There was a rest stop that was about a 15-minute drive away. We decided to do the only thing that made sense. We'd drive it over there and then call the police. The reception wasn't good out here. We made it not even a mile from the driveway before something caught my eye. One of the surrounding cabins we thought had been empty had its lights on. I pulled over to the side of the dirt road. Now we had another decision to make. I was in favor of talking to them. Elise was adamantly against it. If they're the ones who did this, do we really want to confront them? She asked. It was a good point, but I wasn't convinced just yet. I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead into the steering wheel, trying to think. Then Elise started tapping on my shoulder. Anthony, she hissed quietly. Someone's coming towards us. I raised my head and looked over at the cabin, indeed seeing a shadow coming down from the lawn, clearly headed our way. I cursed under my breath. Hide the baby, I whispered to her. She looked at me for a second and then nodded, placing it on her lap and covering it up with a blanket we had in the back seat. I turned the lights off and prayed it wouldn't start crying again. Soon a man came into view. Appearance-wise, there seemed to be no red flags. He had glasses, wore a dress shirt and khakis, was well-built, and seemed reasonably clean-cut overall, though the darkness did make it hard for me to gauge his expression. I rolled down the window slightly. Hey there, he said. Can I help you with something? Are y'all in trouble? I swallowed and committed myself to the lie. Thanks, but we're fine, I said. We're on our way to get some groceries. Just putting the address into the GPS. I held out my phone for him to see. The man nodded, and I think his expression changed. So no trouble at all? He asked. No trouble. For a while he stood silent and still, as if trying to scrutinize every word I had just said. Then he raised his arm to scratch his neck, and that's when I saw the dirt on his sleeve. Well, if there's no trouble then I'll let y'all go. He made what I think was a smile, and then shuffled off into the gloom. Not in the direction of the cabin, but the woods on the other side. I cursed again and drove off. By the time the rest stop came into view, I couldn't stop my arms from shaking. Our signal had come back a while ago, but I still felt safer stopping where there might be people around. I parked in front of the gas station and stood outside with a cigarette while Elise made the call inside the car. A few minutes later, she opened the door. They're coming, she said, visibly relieved. Did you tell them about the guy? She nodded. I took a deep drag and then tossed the butt into the garbage. What the hell had we just stumbled upon? I thought about and decided that I'd really rather not know. We were sitting in the car for about 5 minutes when I saw lights approaching from down the road, down the way we'd come. Maybe they were police. Maybe they weren't. I wasn't going to take the risk. I told Elise to take the baby into the diner next to the gas station while I remained in the car. It was a good call, because they sure as hell weren't the cops. The vehicle pulled up right beside me in the empty lot, a familiar face staring right at me through an open window. Glasses. There was somebody else in the car with him, wearing what I could only describe as some sort of cloak, his face obscured by the hood. The man opened the door and began rapping on my window. Once again, I rolled it down just a sliver. Yeah. Where is it? He said, still trying to appear amicable, but clearly doing his best to suppress a scowl. I shook my head. I don't know what dash. Where the hell is it? He said, cutting me off. I don't know what you're talking about. Any friendliness in his expression was no more. The man closed his eyes, breathed deeply. Then he stared down at his watch. Is it with your wife? I didn't answer. If so, then she's in danger. What the hell are you talking about? Go check on your wife. Then you'll see what I'm talking about. I shook my head, grabbed the gun. All right, get back, I stammered out before shoving past him and towards the diner. The man rolled his eyes, put his hands up, and backed off. Inside the place was more emptiness and quiet. Not even a waitress. I gripped the gun tight. Elise! I shouted. Silence. Elise! More silence. With panic overtaking me, I ran forward and nearly tripped over something. A pair of legs. Slowly, I turned my head to see the rest of the body. Lying there was what I assumed to be the waitress, her torso eviscerated. Her face, untouched though drenched in blood, was contorted into something hellish, eyes wide and mouth twisted in agape. I swallowed the bile coming up my throat and stumbled around, my desperation mounting. Eventually, I looked over the bathroom door and saw it stained with a bloody handprint. Trying to reel in my nerves, I scrambled over and walked slowly in. More emptiness at first, though I could hear some faint whimpering coming from one of the stalls. Elise, I whispered. Anthony. She opened the door, stepping out cautiously. Her hands were covered in blood. Are you all right? With shell-shocked eyes, she gave a slight nod. A sigh of relief. Let's get out of here. The two of us tiptoed back into the dining area, where we were greeted by Glasses and the Cloak, the latter standing behind the former by the entrance. Great job, Glasses said. Really fantastic job. Keep it down, I whispered, though it came out louder than I'd hoped. He flashed a grim smile. You don't think she already knows where you are? I just stared at him, unblinking, until a noise stirred me out of it. Sounded like pots falling onto the ground. The man laughed. What a mess. Guess I can't be too mad, though. It's good at luring people in. And he took a deep breath. I recommend you two leave and let us take care of this. Fine with me. Grabbing Elise by the hand, I led her out of there. By now the police had arrived, soaking the lot with red and blue. 2 cars sat there. A bit overkill for what we had originally called for, but in an area like this, I suppose they had nothing better to do. 2 cops got out of each, one stocky, one lanky, both laser-eyed on Elise's bloodied hands and clothes. The stocky one grabbed his pistol, and soon I realized I was still holding mine. I set it down slowly and then held up my hands. They just looked at me, evidently awaiting some explanation that I could not provide. I closed my eyes, tried stuttering some sentences together that may as well have been gibberish. Sensing the terror in my expression, the cop lowered his weapon and approached me curiously. Sir, are you hurt? I shook my head. Where did the blood come from? I shook my head again. The cop's eyes wandered over to the diner. I wouldn't go in there, I choked out. The cop stared. Why not? I wouldn't go in. The cop looked back at his partner and gave him a nod. Then he headed for the door, and I found myself devoid of anything left to say. The lanky one looked at me, walked towards me. Slowly now. We'll figure this out. I exhaled and shuffled forward a few steps before gunshots filled the air. The cop cursed, looked between us and the diner before drawing his pistol and running in, all while yelling for us to stay put. I looked at Elise, who hadn't said anything the entire time, her expression now blank, her skin paler than I'd ever seen it before. I picked the pistol back up, walked her over to the car, and planted her in the passenger seat before getting in and putting the key in the ignition and my foot on the brakes, ready to peel out of there at any given moment. But not yet. I had a hunch that we were better off knowing what was going to happen here. So I waited. More gunshots. Some shouts. At one point, some unearthly screech. I could feel my foot slowly easing up on the brakes, but I forced myself to remain steadfast. A few minutes later, something came crashing out through the wall, spraying bricks and dust. Something large. I could only really get glimpses of it at first, but I could make out 2 figures clearly struggling against each other. One of them appeared to be the cloaked man. Whatever the other thing was, I couldn't tell you. Close to 7 feet tall, wielding bony and lanky limbs, clammy gray skin, dark wet hair flowing down its slender waist, clawed hands the size of bowling balls. I looked on and saw flashes of its face, those familiar red irises now contained within horrible, bulging eyes. A long, serpent-like tongue hung out of its cavernous mouth, whipping itself in rapid bursts at the cloak, who parried them feverishly with what appeared to be some giant, medieval knight's sword. God, they were fast as well. Eventually, the cloak caught the creature's tongue with one of his gloves and then brought the sword down on it with his other, splitting it in two. The creature reeled away, but he pushed forward, driving the blade through its throat before chopping through one side of its neck. It made a horrible croaking as it fell. Its body sprawled into bloody, bony mass on the pavement. Watching the inexplicable sequence play out had put me into a near trance. Then I felt the vehicle shift down, and suddenly the cloak was sitting in my back seat. I looked at him through my rear view, his face pale, bony, blood-stained, expressionless, the sword laid flat on his lap. He raised his head to look back at me, and I saw that his lips were stitched together with metal. Then I looked at Elise, who I could only describe as being catatonic by that point. The cloak pushed against the back of my seat and pointed towards the steering wheel. Seconds later, I was driving, and it seemed rather obvious where he wanted me to go. I parked in front of the cabin, and the cloak got out first. He rapped against my window, gesturing for me to do the same. I breathed deeply, stepped out, and went to grab Elise. The cloak grabbed my shoulder before I could and wagged his finger at me. I shook my head. Well, I'm not leaving her here. He just stared at me, then at her. Then he started heading for the cabin. I picked her up and followed him inside, carefully placing her down on the couch. By now her skin was the gray of wet concrete, her eyes blinking erratically. I stared at her in disbelief. I stared for a long time. At some point, the cloak snapped me out of it by tapping the sword on the floor. I looked up and saw him leering over me, and only then could I grasp just how large this guy was. He stood 6'5", maybe 6'6", his shoulders broad, his chest protruding and blocky. Underneath his eyes were tattoos of strange symbols. I swallowed. "We need to help her," I said. I think he tried to smile at me. It looked forced, unnatural. He then walked towards the back of the room and used the sword to cut through a large lock that had been protecting an inconspicuous wooden chest in the corner. One slight swing, and it split in two, old metal dropping in pieces to the ground. He lifted the chest open with the tip of the blade and then bent down and grabbed something and pulled it out and tossed it to me. A machine gun. Looked like an Uzi. More disbelief. As I stared at the weapon, the cloak had gone and discarded his sword for another, a smaller blade that he kept in a scabbard at his side. In his arms, he held a large assault rifle. "What the hell is this?" I asked. The cloak set his rifle down and picked up a notebook on the table in front of him and wrote something down. He held it up to me. The words "We kill it" were scrawled messily across the page. "Kill what?" I asked. The cloak just stared at me, apparently perplexed by my question. I shook my head. "But I thought you already killed it." The cloak sighed, picked the notebook back up. This time he wrote 5 lives. "You mean we have to kill that thing 4 more times?" The cloak smiled again, nodded. I tossed the weapon on the floor. "You kill that thing," I said. "I'm taking my wife, and I'm getting out of here." I suppose I was a bit overzealous of me. I tried stepping past the guy, but found a pipe-like arm blocking any forward motion. He looked down at me and shook his head. He shoved me back, not a big movement on his part, but I just about went flying. Picking the notebook back up, he wrote something else. "You dug it up," it said. "Now you're responsible." I couldn't believe this. I looked at Elise again and saw that she had begun to blink slower. "I need to help her," I said. The cloak went back to writing. "She has been cursed. Only way to help is to kill it." I spat. "You're lying." The cloak stared at me. This time he wrote, "Do you want to help her?" A rock and a hard place. On one hand, I was almost certain this guy was bullshitting me. I mean, who the hell was he? What even was he? On the other hand, I wasn't sure how much I was willing to risk on the off chance he wasn't. The cloak wrote something else. "IT will follow you both until you're dead." I sighed. You should have started with that. I carried Elise up to one of the bedrooms while the cloak did his thing downstairs. Preparations, in his own words. As I closed and locked the door behind me, I had to reconcile to myself how wrong this all felt. Like being lost in the woods in the dark, only to be offered a way out by somebody who had no business being there to begin with. Do you trust and follow him? I suppose it depends on what you have on the line. Back downstairs, I sunk into the couch and ran my fingers across the Uzi's hard, cold plastic. I've had experience shooting. A lot of experience, in fact. But the cloak couldn't have known this. Is he really trying to help me? His expression gives nothing away, and I can tell he avoids looking at me. I don't know how long we've been waiting, but we can hear her now. Second story. I saw the thing in the woods. We don't talk to the thing in the woods. I won't go up north anymore, not by those woods. I'll go out of my way to avoid driving in that direction. Even so, I need to write this down. I need a paper trail if I suddenly disappear like Sean. We saw something up there, and I think it saw us too. Now, I'm terrified it's just waiting for me to come back. I saw the thing in the woods, and I got away from it. At least I thought we did. About 6 months ago, we were gearing up for one hell of a camping weekend out by a secluded lake that our friend James had found. He had said it was off the beaten path and not in any open campgrounds, so the odds of us being disturbed were slim. That meant we could party and enjoy ourselves without needing to worry about other campers. And to top it all off, we'd be near a lake, so we could go swimming. There were 5 of us in total. Myself, Sean, James, Rick, and our buddy Dylan. We had piled into 2 cars with our camping gear and began the trip north. It was about 3 hours, and James spent most of it talking up the campsite, telling us how awesome it was going to be getting to camp out by a lakeshore, and that we were going to have an awesome time. I hadn't been this excited to do something in a long time. I looked forward to a chance to unwind with some of my closest friends. The road didn't lead us up to our campsite, and there wasn't a path, but James was insistent that we were in the right area. So we gathered our things and followed him in a hike through the woods toward the site. That was when we first noticed that things may have been wrong. As we journeyed through the woods, I had heard Dylan call out to us from behind. When we turned back, we saw he was holding what looked like a rotted old sign. It says, "Don't talk to it," he observed, staring at the old thing. Looks pretty ancient, too. Maybe it's like a piece of old settler shit. More likely the rambling of some crazy guy from a long time ago. Heard there were like cults in these parts in the early 1900s. Rick responded, "Oh, good, cults." I said, rolling my eyes. "Guys, there are no cults up here. I've been here a few times now and never ran into anything weird. Maybe got close to Mountain Lion once, but they're not going to mess with you if you leave them alone." James didn't seem amused by the conversation that was being had. The sign's obviously old. We can sit here and speculate about what it was about for the next 6 hours, and we won't be any closer to the campsite. Or we can leave it where we found it and not worry about what some old piece of it has to say. We all agreed that the sign was a little silly. Maybe it was an old Halloween direction or a relic from some old movie they shot up here. None of us assumed it was some kind of cryptic warning. Warnings should be direct. Hey, if you talk to this thing, it's going to eat your eyes, or something along those lines. Not just don't talk to it. What was it? Why didn't one talk with it? Vague warnings gave us nothing, and so we paid it no heed, no matter how much we should have. There were no more weird signs or vague warnings on the journey, just the sound of birds and the growing sound of calm waters lapping against the shore. We had hiked a good 4 miles into the deep woods before we came to a clearing. James was right, though. It was magnificent. The sun illuminated a grassy field that broke into a sandy shoreline, revealing a crystalline blue lake that shimmered like a diamond in the sun's rays. "Wow," I murmured. James elbowed me and grinned. "What did I tell you? Absolutely gorgeous." I nodded in amazement. "This is choice, man. Just wow." We all spent a few minutes admiring the scene set out before us, and then we got to work setting up our campsite. Within the hour, we were ready to relax and enjoy our first night in paradise. We enjoyed the day fishing, swimming, and drinking, and as night began to fall, we built a fire and enjoyed some of the food we had brought. We spent the night exchanging creepy stories and getting drunk. When James' turn rolled around, he brought us all in close, shining the flashlight under his chin. "You guys ever hear of the thing in the woods?" he asked, and as we all shook our heads, he grinned. "There's stories that float around these parts of a monstrous creature that roams the woods at night. It speaks using stolen voices to draw out unwary travelers. Then it tears them apart, stealing their identities and leaving behind nothing but a pile of gore. Legend says the creature can speak as anyone it has taken, that the only way to survive an encounter with it is to ignore it completely. Never ever acknowledge it. Something clicked as he told this story, and I muttered, "Don't talk to it." The others looked at me as James smiled. That's right. Don't talk to it, don't look at it. Pretend it's not there, because the moment you acknowledge it, the moment it knows you know it's there, it will take everything from you. Like this sign, I said warily. I did say it was a local legend, man. James replied with a smile. He said nothing else, handing off the stick we were using to determine whose turn it was to tell a story to Dylan. As Dylan was finishing his story about man on the bus, we heard something. At first it was faint and hard to make out, but the sound continued, and as it did it became clearer. Someone was screaming. Long, agonized wails from somewhere within the forest. When Rick and I stood to see what the hell was going on, James stopped us. Animals are weird in these parts, man. Don't go putting your nose where it doesn't belong. Nighttime can be weird, and whatever the hell that was. Let's not bring it to the campsite. We both stared at him, bewildered. He wasn't usually that vague. The hell are you talking about, man? That sounds like a woman screaming. We need to go see if we can help her. Rick hissed. And if it is, did you bring a gun to shoot any mountain lions or bears that might be in the woods? Nighttime is their time, man. If you want to check it out, we can go in the morning. For now, I say we kill the fire and get some rest. No sense in drawing any predators in. James argued, and then he smirked besides. What if it's the thing in the woods? He makes a good point, Rick. Even if we did get there and it was someone being attacked, what we do aside from shout or get ourselves killed? I responded, ignoring the comment about monsters. Rick shook his head. No, I'm going to find out what the hell that was. If you aren't coming, fine. Stay here and kill the light. Piss your pants while you wait for this stupid thing in the woods. I'm not gonna. I came to have fun, not to be scared shitless. James sighed and shook his head, and for a second I could swear there was the slightest of smiles on his face. Your funeral, man, he muttered as he stood and poured a water bucket over the flames. In the moonlight, he looked to the rest of us. Get some sleep, guys. Rick growled and grabbed a flashlight from his tent. I'll be back, he said bluntly, stomping off into the woods. We weren't about to let our friend go out into the dark alone, and the rest of us followed suit. Well, all of us, save for James. He just stood there at the campsite and watched, waving as we headed into the woods. What the hell is his problem? Sean asked quietly. I don't know, I replied softly, looking back over my shoulder, but he told that weird story, and now we're hearing things. You think he's trying to pull some kind of elaborate prank? Sean nodded. James has always been kind of weird. You remember when him and Daisy went camping, and he came back by himself? So they broke up, and Daisy wasn't coming back? You remember how we all quietly joked he killed her, but we got that call later on saying she was sorry she didn't stop by to say goodbye, and that she was moving to California? She said she couldn't be around James anymore, that he did something that really pissed her off. Wonder if he tried to pull this shit with her? I barely remembered that incident, but I wasn't surprised Sean did. He and Daisy were always really close, and he must have been pretty upset that she didn't come by to talk about what had happened. If this is a prank, it's an awful one. I whispered as we trudged through the darkness, guided by the beams of our flashlights. Then we heard the scream again, louder and clearer than we had before. Rick burst into a sprint, heading off into the direction of the screams. We followed him, ducking under low branches and jumping over roots. Dylan, Rick, and James were way more athletic than I was, but I did my best to keep up, until my foot snagged a root and I tripped. I hit the ground, and stars rocked my vision as my head bounced against a rock. The others didn't notice. At least I didn't think they did, but I heard Sean. At first, he sounded like he was underwater, but as my head cleared, I could hear him calling my name more distinctly. Thinking back on it now, hitting my head the way I did probably saved my life. Sean helped me to my feet, and we followed the direction Rick and Dylan and run off to, a lot more cautiously than we had been before. We arrived at what I could only assume was the site of the screaming, and we found Rick and Dylan. We found what was left of them, and we saw it. It was a campsite, the fire still smoldering and the tents thrown against trees, their frames bent and the canvas torn. There was a faint wet shimmer on the trees and all over the ground. I had assumed it was blood. As I took in the carnage, there was something else that I noticed. There was no sound, no insects chirping, no leaves rustling, just the occasional crackle from the fire. The world around this place was eerily still, but then something caught my eye just a few feet into the treeline. There, standing over what I can only describe as the viscera that was once my friend's, was a creature. It hunched over what was left of them, picking through pieces of gore. Its form looked as though it was made of gnarled and twisted branches woven together to form this weird facsimile of a body. Its face was like a skull carved from bark without a lower jaw, and as it held pieces of gore into the moonlight, I could see the twisted, empty hollows that were its eyes. I wanted to gasp, to scream at the sight of the thing, but Sean's hand quickly shot to my shoulder and started to pull me away. The snapping twig had to be the loudest thing I had ever heard. The creature's eyeless gaze shot into the trees and saw it speak, mouthlessly. "Hey, who is that? Who's out there? Sean?" It spoke with Rick's voice. "Hey bro, it's fine. Come here real quick. I got something I want to show you." "Run," Sean whispered. "Run to the cars." I watched as Sean did a full about face and broke into a sprint, and I followed close behind. We bolted through the darkness of the forest, in what we had both assumed was the direction of the road. Branches whipped against my exposed skin, scratching and tearing into my flesh as I imagined what those claw-like branches of the thing would do to me. My chest burned and heaved as I spared a glance over my shoulder. I wish I didn't. It was following us silently. It was sprinting after us on all fours, but its footfalls made no noise. "Don't run, man. Hey, it's gonna be all right," it called to us in Dylan's voice. I rasped, focusing my attention back into the darkness, pushing my burning muscles to the brink. I wanted to fall over. Every part of me screamed to just give up and let this thing take me, but I pushed forward. I was rewarded with the sight of a break in the treeline. "Come play. Come be with us," a child's voice called to me. "Stop being such a coward." It was a woman's voice, vaguely familiar. I burst from the treeline and threw open my car door, Sean dove into the passenger's seat. I got the engine started just as the thing burst from the treeline. It furiously raised one of its gnarled claws and swiped at my car door. The vehicle crunched as the steel caved and its claws tore through the metal, but the door remained. I slammed on the gas and sped away. The creature roared in frustration, thousands of voices crying out in rage. "No, come back and be a part of us." I barreled down the highway as fast as my car would go, adrenaline pushing me forward. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I expected the thing to be following, but it wasn't. I sped to the nearest town, and we immediately went to the police. We didn't expect them to believe us, but they took one look at us and at my car, and they told me they'd take a look first thing in the morning, that it was dangerous to go out poking through the woods in the middle of the night. There was nothing we could do to convince them to go earlier. They seemed adamant about going the morning, claiming it would be safer for everyone. Did they know? Did they know about the thing? The next morning, a squad of officers left to investigate the place we had described. They returned late in the afternoon. There was a grimness in their faces, like they had seen something terrible. They told us about the campsite that we had found, and of all the blood. They chalked it up to an animal attack, claiming there was no way anything human could do that sort of damage. When we asked about James, they all looked at each other and shook their heads. They couldn't find any sign of him, and his car was gone. The only reason they were able to figure out where we had been were the skid marks and the damage to the treeline. We drove home after I got checked out by a doctor for my head. I swore to myself that I'd never go back up there, that whatever the hell that thing was could have its territory. Sean was different, though. He told me he was going to find James. Said he was going to figure out why James knew so much about this thing and why he brought us up there in the first place. 2 months ago, Sean called me, saying he got a message from James. He said James told him he could come and talk to him in the place where it all began. I begged him not to go, pleaded with him to stay away from that place, but he told me he was going to expose James and everything he had done. That was 2 months ago, and I didn't hear from Sean again. Not until last week, when I got a manila envelope with a collection of recordings that he had made. There was a note, but only one thing was written: watch, listen. Third story. It came from deep within the woods. I was living on the edge of the woods in a broken-down van with my friend, who happened to be a prostitute at the time. I realize that's a loaded sentence, but my dear reader, I assure you, I couldn't possibly fabricate what I am about to reveal. We were both hopeless drug addicts, and my days were often spent simply waiting for her to return to our humble abode with whatever goods she could get her hands on. It's key to mention this, despite my reluctance. I want to paint a picture of how utterly alone I was out there on the edge of the woods. No phone, no car, no neighbors. Just me and my books. I had become an absolute recluse, isolated sans Herman Melville and the alleged prostitute. I often slept away the days and stayed awake throughout the night. I began to get sort of anxious when my loose friend made the comment along the lines of something like, "Geez, don't you ever just get creeped out being here all alone? Some psycho could come murder the shit out of you, and no one would ever know." She oftentimes teased me, so we both had a sick sense of humor. It wasn't until she made this crass commentary on our pathetic living situation that my daydream turned into a nightmare. She had a good point. Late one night, I hopped out of our Volkswagen Westphalia to take a leak, and I began to survey my surroundings. From the driver's side of the van, the nearest road was about 100 yards away, but we were so far out in the boonies that this hardly meant anything. On the other side of the van, the main entrance and exit consisted of a big sliding door, facing about 30 yards of clear flat ground, followed by a swift drop-off into thick bushes and trees. Usually the only light, natural or unnatural, came from the flashlight I used inside the van to read with. We stuck out in those woods, a real eyesore smack dab in the middle of the mysterious beauty of Mother Night and Mother Nature. I grew paranoid. I laughed aloud to myself to lift my spirit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Here I am. Come get me. I'd egg on the demons and bogeymen lurking a mere stone's throw away. If my flashlight died, I might not be able to find my way back to the van. I pondered the irony of being suicidal and afraid of the dark simultaneously. These were strange times indeed. They were about to get stranger. I felt cold, a drop in my stomach. Walking back to the van, I heard the sound of acorns falling from the surrounding trees, a sound that freaked me out constantly because it was identical to footsteps. Usually logic won over my fears, and a blissful state of willful ignorance would allow me to ignore these childish delusions. But I noticed that these sounds weren't coming from the trees. It came from an abandoned shed about 40 yards behind the van, which was in the clearing, where there certainly were no trees. I fed my paranoia, stopping dead in my tracks. In front of the van, I stood there motionless, listening to the roaring silence in between faint heart throbs. I decided not to look. Surely there was nothing there. I had nothing to worry about. And who cares anyway if someone's stalking me and decides to come put me out of my misery? Then I'm all for it. It would save me the time of writing a suicide note. That was the snarky, defeatist testimony that finally stilled my writhing nerves. Whether I believed it or not, I got back into the van and lit a cigarette. Depressed and tired, I couldn't bring myself to dive back into the deep pages of Moby Dick. I was thoroughly unsettled, although I couldn't quite figure out why. "Where is she?" I said aloud. My apathy was contingent on a steady state of numbness, an equation that only my drug of choice could balance. I chalked up my uneasiness to withdrawals. Crunch, 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 a deer trotted off in the distance, from deep within the woods, off beyond the drop-off of thick bushes and trees. Crunch, 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 it steadily grew nearer, and I noticed it wasn't the regular four-legged fawns that took their leisurely strolls in the moonlight. No, this was a two-legged anomaly. I must note that I had spent a great deal of time in this van, alone, longer than I care to admit, but in this time I developed a conditioned stimuli to when my better half returned home. like a dog eagerly crouched by the door of its master's domain, wagging its tail at the familiar sound of car keys coming up the steps to greet him after a long day of limbo solitude. Now, I mentioned there was a road nearby. I could always tell when she was returning, first by the sound of music intertwined with the grumbling engine of her friend. In his big truck coming up the road, I could hear the car door slam, and out she'd hop into the night, wobbling through the clearing up to the driver's side of the van, and around to finally show her devilish grin in the entrance to our said humble abode. But this unmistakable 1-2 step was coming from deep within the woods, from beyond the drop-off and the thick bushes and trees, a demon coming straight out of no man's land, impossibly steady, like a metronome. It drew nearer and nearer. Crunch, 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 crunch. I cautiously drew the curtains aside and saw quite possibly the most disturbing thing that could have been there. Nothing. Absolutely nothing but trees dimly illuminated by my flashlight of hope. Crunch, 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 crunch. I rubbed my eyes and stared into the abyss with no avail. Crunch, 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 crunch. I desperately flicked my eyes around, failing to comprehend what was coming my way. The thing had to be right in front of my face by now, but I saw nothing, absolutely nothing but the trees and the darkness. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Time froze. It stopped at my door. If I opened the door from where I was sitting and reached my hand out, I could surely touch it. In every horror movie you've ever seen, this is the moment where something pops out, or at the very least there's a large bang. I did not blink. The only sound that broke the roar of silence was a lone acorn dropping off in the distance. I waited for anything to happen, for this fellow fiend or foe to reveal itself. My mind scrambled to explain this intrusion, with no avail. In one swift movement, I did quite possibly the largest act of bravery I have ever committed and flung the door wide open, flashlight flooding hopeful rays into the jungle of night. Much to my dismay, there was nothing there. Finally, I blinked, utterly terrified, alone, silence. I laid there for an undeterminable amount of time, waiting, listening. I called out for my friend. Surely this was another cruel trick played on by the mischievous horror. Silence. 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 I longed for an acorn to fall. I was shook. I peered out of the door to the left, to the right. I needed to sleep. I was hearing things. It's the drugs making you paranoid. Anything to keep the unbearable thought of, holy shit, whatever that was still outside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I am crazy. I'm hearing things. This is not real. I retreated to the back of the van, clutching my book, my flashlight, and a golf club for protection. Ignore this terrible dream, I said. I read the same sentence over and over for as long as I could bear. 5 minutes passed. I began to relax. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm not quite sure. Someone giggled directly outside my door. Whatever was out there sat for a solid 20 minutes in complete silence, just watching me. I died. The startling nearness of the shrill but brief laughter undid the previous half hour of reassurance, and I felt the pure terror of dreams where you try to run or scream, but you can't. All I could do was stare and wait. Just then I heard music and the familiar low grumble of my fateful friend returning from her night of dishonest work. I heard the big truck approach, its car door slam, the familiar wobble up to the van on the proper side. The van door slid open, and there she stood in all her glory, horrifyingly unaware of the evil entity that she was basking in. "What's your deal?" She laughed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." When I think back to that night, I kind of wish I had. She hopped in the van, slammed the door behind her, and with a grin revealed a bag containing the only substance blacker than night. "Here you go, baby. You must be starving." Fourth story. I found a journal deep in the woods of Superior National Forest. I've been what some may call a wilderness expert for almost 2 decades now. I plan my trips to various forests very carefully to ensure I make it out alive. I bring all the supplies necessary to survive for a couple of weeks in case I get lost, and I also bring a satellite phone, GPS, and a weapon as a last resort. Sometimes getting lost in the woods is part of the fun. As long as you know what you're doing, that is. The story I'm sharing with you today is of a young man who didn't take all the precautions I would recommend for a journey into an unknown forest. On my most recent expedition to Superior National Forest in Minnesota, I came upon a journal hanging from a tree. There were only a few pages left in the journal. All the rest were torn out to be used for kindling as the writer addresses in the journal. The contents of this journal are very strange, and I'll touch on that later. But without further ado, my name is Anthony Lawrence. I am a student of Bemidji State University. I don't know what the exact date is, but I first came out here on August 3rd, 2017. I think it's been about 2 weeks now. If you find this journal, you can stop looking for me. I don't have much paper left in this journal, so I'll have to try and keep this short. About a week before coming out here, I got a message on Facebook from some guy saying he's looking for healthy young adventurers who want to earn some money. He said he'd give me $1,000 to spend 48 hours in the woods, using whatever resources I came across to stay alive. Apparently, he was writing some kind of book about wilderness survival and wanted to see what people did with their 48 hours to stay alive. He would provide each individual with a backpack containing limited supplies and a GoPro camera to record the adventure. I used to be an Eagle Scout, so I figured, sure, 2 days in the woods is nothing. And with that kind of money, I could buy a new gaming chair for my dorm and have enough left over for pizza for the whole next semester. I messaged him back, and we set up a time to meet. I was to bring nothing other than some sturdy clothes. He said he'd provide everything I would need to survive in the woods for the 2 days. When I met with him, he seemed like a nice enough guy. Clearly, he was very wealthy, too, as he dropped me off at my spot in the forest with his personal helicopter. On the flight over, he explained that the backpack had a GPS tracking device in it so that he could find me wherever I was after the 48 hours, and he can pick me up. I thought it was safe to assume this guy knew what he was doing, considering all the prep work he put into this, so I trusted him. He dropped me off and flew away. I spent the first few minutes sorting through what I had in the backpack. There was a simple pocket knife, which I stuffed into a front cargo pocket on my pants for quick access. I was given a small journal, which I also put in my cargo pants. The rest of the contents were a matchbook with 2 matches, a full water bottle, one of those silver thermal blankets, some rope, and various other supplies you'd expect to see in a survival kit that I doubted I'd be using. Oh, and of course the GoPro, which I'd strapped to my chest. There was no map, compass, or any kind of navigation equipment. The idea, I guess, was that I was lost in the woods and had to survive. So I set off. I spent most of the first day hiking in as straight a path as I could manage. Other than the clearing where we landed, it was nothing but thick wooded areas so far. My first goal was to find a source of water I could come back to when needed, but so far no luck. I was dropped off in the early afternoon, so at this point it was starting to get dark and the temperature was dropping. I decided I should start setting up camp. I gathered various small branches and brush from around the area and found a small clearing where I could start a fire without setting the whole forest ablaze. I used a tiny pocket knife to cut off smaller branches from the surrounding trees and got a decent-sized stockpile of wood for the night. I had to make use of some of the pages from this journal for kindling to get the fire started and carefully lit one of the 2 matches I had to get it going. So far, so good. I took out the thermal blanket and lay down to sleep next to the fire. I awoke before the rise of the sun. The fire was just a mess of ash at this point, and I didn't want to waste my other match so early getting another fire started, so I packed everything up and set off again. After several more hours of hiking, I finally heard something that was music to my ears running water. A stream. At this point, my water bottle was nearly empty, so I was ecstatic that I'd be able to finish it off and refill. 2 days out here for $1,000? Easiest money I've ever made. I followed the sound of the water to a small stream that seemed to go on for quite a way. After filling my bottle, I decided I'd follow this stream in the direction it was flowing from, ideally to find a lake or something. I still had plenty of daylight left, so I kept going. I was getting pretty hungry at this point, so it'd be nice to find a lake with some fish in it, But even in the worst-case scenario, I could last 2 days without food, no problem. It was getting dark again, and the stream I was following was getting wider, but still no lake in sight. I should have just set up camp right then while I still had daylight, but I was determined to find this lake, and kept going. After a couple more hours, it was just too dark to continue. There was some moonlight shining through the leaves above, but not much. Not enough to keep following this stream. So I did the best I could to gather up some more wood for another fire in the dark of the night, and set up a makeshift campground again. I started the fire with pages from the journal for kindling again, and used my last match. I hunkered down and went to sleep, excited to find this lake the following morning and get some food before the guy picked me up to go back home. Loud cracking woke me up in the middle of the night, branches breaking from all around me. I sprang to my feet, startled. I wasn't sure what kind of wildlife was out here, but it could very well be bears or wolves. Adrenaline began pumping through my body, and I tried to listen for where the sounds were coming from, but I could barely hear over my heartbeat. I had to do something, though. I couldn't just stand here like an idiot waiting to be eaten. Whatever kind of animal this was, I felt like I'd be safe if I could climb one of these trees. As the cracking of branches grew closer and louder, I began to climb a big pine tree near me, with plenty of branches making it easy enough to climb. The fire was dying down very quickly, but I had enough residual light to start the climb. I got up 1, 2, 3, 4 branches, probably about 6 feet from the ground, when the noises stopped. So I stopped too. I strained my ears to listen, but again, it was difficult to hear over my heartbeat. I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, 2 of my hands gripping adjacent branches above, one of my feet supporting me, and the other foot hanging freely. Nothing but silence around me now. I thought maybe whatever it was had gone now, and that I was safe. I adjusted my grip on the tree, when the branch my foot was on broke off, and I lost my grip on the branches above. I fell backwards and hit my head in the hard ground below, knocking me unconscious. I don't know how long I was out, but when I awoke, it was still dark. Even darker than before, it seemed. I wasn't on the ground where I'd landed, though. I was on a flat surface like a table. I tried to sit up and look around, but I couldn't move. I realized then that my hands and feet were bound to this table. I panicked, flexing every muscle in my body, trying to get free of this trap. I screamed, "What?" over and over again. As I struggled, I heard what sounded like voices all around me, but I could not discern what the voices were saying. I thought I was alone out here. I was literally out in the middle of nowhere. Who is out here? Who is strapping people down in the middle of the forest? I continued to convulse my body, feeling the bindings that were holding me down loosen ever so slightly. That's when shit got really scary, though. I don't know if I was drugged or what, but really crazy stuff started to happen. I heard a loud, thumping noise. I heard branches breaking, trees, entire trees being snapped in half from the sound of it. Something was getting closer to me. The voices around me got louder, sounding like some kind of chanting. I quickly realized that I was some kind of sacrifice. Maybe this was all in my head. I really don't know. The absurdity of it all makes it difficult for me to believe that whatever was happening was real. The thumping and cracking of the woods grew louder and louder, until I could make out some kind of silhouette against the backdrop of the woods in front of me, barely illuminated by the moonlight. It was huge. Whatever it was impossibly huge. I was freaking out like I'd never freaked out before. I screamed as I continued trying to get free of the bindings holding me down, as I watched the forest being torn down in front of me, the chanting from the voices growing louder and louder. The beast was probably 100 yards away from me when I got one of my hands loose. My face was a mess of tears and snot from crying, which I hadn't realized I'd been doing until now. I broke my hand free and quickly wiped away at my face before getting to work on the other bindings. Once I had that one hand free, I was able to make quick work of the other bindings. I got my other hand free, and the creature let out a deafening roar. The chanting voices around me stopped. I hastened my pace and shakily got to work on the bindings on my feet. After a mere couple of seconds, I was free of these as well. I sprang up from the table and began to run. I fell over almost immediately. I was incredibly dizzy. They had to have drugged me. I got back up and continued running away from the beast. I could still hear the forest being torn down behind me, but I did not turn around to look. I just kept running, struggling to overcome the dizziness and keep upright. Whatever this thing was, it was either very slow or just didn't care enough to pursue me. After a few minutes of running, I could no longer hear the creature, the breaking of the trees, or the chanting voices. But I did not stop. I could not stop. Even if the creature didn't continue in my pursuit, chances are the source of those voices would not let their sacrifice get away that easily. Eventually, I saw the sun rising on the horizon, and I figured I'd been running for long enough. I stopped, leaned back against a tree, and slouched to the ground. I was so scared and in so much pain from the fall from the tree, the bindings on my hands and feet, the tumble to the ground when I got free, and all the thorns and shit I ran into during my escape. I put my head between my legs and sobbed uncontrollably. Once I was done with my episode, I wiped off my face with my shirt and assessed my situation. I no longer had the backpack or the GoPro. In my cargo pockets, I still had the small pocket knife. I wish I'd realized sooner that I still had this, and this journal. But that was all. I almost had a psychotic break when I realized that without that backpack, the guy who brought me here had no way of finding me. I had to get myself together and figure out what I was going to do. The stream I was following the previous night was nowhere near. I had no idea where I was in relation to the stream, my starting point, or even the sacrificial area I just run from. I was lost to begin with, but now I was really lost. They say that if you get lost in the woods, you should stay where you're at so that you're not continually running away from whatever search parties they may send to find you. But I couldn't do that. Not with whatever that creature was out there, and the cultists or whoever they were that were helping it. I had to keep moving, and I had to come up with a plan on how I was going to get that backpack back. After a few minutes collecting myself, I stood up and began to walk. I didn't know where I was going, but I figured I had like a 50% chance of finding my starting point, the cultist area, or the stream I was following if I just kept walking. It was a few hours yet to the 48-hour mark, so he'd have to come looking for me soon. Maybe if I heard his helicopter, I could somehow signal him. I walked for hours, and everything was still so unfamiliar. The sun was at its highest point, but still no sound of a helicopter. I don't even know how far those people brought me from where I was at. I could be miles away from where I thought I was. I kept walking all day. Eventually, it was getting dark again, and I was still lost. I had no supplies. All I had was my pocket knife and my journal. Well, one thing I learned in my time in Boy Scouts was how to start a fire by rubbing a couple of sticks together. So I took out my pocket knife and got to work on gathering wood. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping tonight. It was too risky, but I at least had to keep warm. After probably an hour of rubbing a couple of sticks together, I never really had the patience to get this to work before. I finally got a fire going. I had to use more pages from the journal to get the fire started. So at this point, I figured I needed to conserve the pages. I didn't know how long I was going to be out here. As anticipated, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat by the fire all night, trying to keep the flames small as to not draw any unwanted attention. Nothing ever came to bother me, though. Morning came, and I'd been out here for almost 3 days now. I was overcome with hunger and thirst. If I was to be out here for a while, I absolutely had to find that stream again. I try to remember which way I was walking those first 2 days based on the position of the sun. I think I figured it out and started walking the opposite direction, perpendicular to the way I had been walking the day before. I walked all day in that direction and still nothing. So I set up camp and actually slept a little bit that night. The next day, I finally found some water. I don't know if it was the same stream I saw before, but it didn't matter. At least I'd be able to survive a little bit longer. I brought my face down to the stream and gulped directly from it like an animal. I was amazed at how much I was able to drink and how satisfying it was. I used some of the water to wash my face and feet and set off to follow the stream to its source. I followed this stream for several days. I didn't want to stray too far from it, as it was the only thing really keeping me alive. Eventually, though, I came across a larger portion of the stream where I saw several frogs and tadpoles. I was starving at this point. I didn't care how disgusting it was. I was going to eat these frogs. So that's what I did. I started a small fire using the same technique that I was starting to get pretty good at, and I cooked some frogs and ate them. People say it tastes like chicken, and well, they're not wrong. I continued this routine of following the stream for the next couple days, and it was getting wider. I was starting to think that I had found my way again, and my theory was confirmed when I saw the ashes of my fire from the second night. Luckily, I had daylight to work with this time. This is where I fell from the tree, and they took me away somewhere. I'm not an expert tracker by any means, but there are definite signs of broken branches that I was able to follow, hopefully, to where they brought me to. I followed this trail for a long, long time, and when I was starting to think I wasn't going to find what I was looking for, I saw it. I saw an opening in the forest where that beast had come through, and I saw the table where they strapped me down. I kept my distance, assessing the area. I didn't see any signs of human or animal life, but if they took my backpack, it had to be near here. That brings me to now. I'm writing this all down just in case I fail and I don't get the backpack. I'm going to hang this journal from a nearby tree. If I don't come back for it, that probably means that whatever is in these woods has killed me. And like I said, you can stop looking. Whatever that thing was, if it wasn't in my imagination, I have no doubt that it could kill me without much trouble. If you're reading this, I am definitely dead. And that's all there was. There were no more blank pages to write on if you wanted to. He had used up the rest of these pages for kindling, I guess. I searched around the area. I found a journal to see if I could find any evidence of his encounters, but I don't see any cavities in the forest from a large creature, and I don't see any kind of table that he might have been bound to. There's no sign that any of this actually happened from what I can tell. The date he wrote down was 2 years ago, so I did some research. As I mentioned earlier, there was something really strange about all this, and I'm not talking about the creature he described. It's likely that the knock on his head had him confused, and his mind was filling in the blanks for something that didn't really happen. I looked him up on Google first and found a missing persons report from August of 2017. So he definitely existed. And this wasn't just some prank journal somebody left in the woods. Then I looked him up on Facebook. His last Facebook post just said, "Going camping for a couple days, won't have phone service. Talk to you all soon." So he didn't really tell people what he was doing. I got a hold of the boy's family and gave them this journal and tried to get more information from them. Obviously, this was very hard for them to take in, but curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know more. I convinced them to sign into their son's Facebook account, which they were able to get into as his password was saved on the home computer, and to look for the message he talked about in the journal. We found a message he described in his journal from the guy offering $1,000. Only thing is, this guy was a ghost. He never existed. His name doesn't turn up any results, and if it truly was a wilderness survival guide author, I would for sure have found something. But no, it all seemed to be some kind of scam. Whoever this guy was, he actually convinced this kid to go to the woods by himself, promising to pick him up after 2 days, likely with no intention to actually follow through. How many kids did he do this to? Was there actually some kind of cult out there he was working with, bringing them sacrifices? Well, hopefully the police will be able to find something out. I doubt I'll ever hear the results of their findings, but I just really hope they find this guy. I'll leave you with a little piece of advice. Never go out into the woods alone, especially without any kind of communications or navigation equipment. And for the love of God, let someone know where you're going. Fifth story, the bell in the woods. Do not let the ancient bell buried deep within the woods frighten you. Save your fear for the creature that answers its call. My grandfather was a cruel man in every sense of the word. The only love he displayed was an unwavering infatuation with bourbon and abusive discipline. Being my only living relative, my childhood was bound to him and his farm by the constricting shackles of the law. His cruelty and frugal practices drove farmhands and hired help away as quickly as he could employ them. My place, however, was in the kitchen. Cooking and cleaning are the only skills a little girl needs to know. These are the words grandfather tattooed to my psyche. As I grew older, he began to stare at me in a way that no family member ever should. Glassy, bloodshot eyes peered through the keyhole whenever I bathed or dressed. I could only turn away and quietly pray to myself for him to stop. On the night he climbed into my bed, I ran, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. 3 days were all that I could bear. The pains of hunger eventually coerced my aching feet to shuffle back towards the farmhouse. As the dim light of dawn illuminated my defeated journey home, a dark object stuck out between the tall oak trees. I crept closer, bare feet crunching dry the leaves below. There it was, covered in decades of dirt, moss, and foliage, an ancient cast-iron bell. It was taller than I was, etched with unfamiliar symbols and words I had never seen before. Without hesitation, as if against my own will, I grabbed the bell's rusty wheel and pulled. I felt an obligation to hear it ring out, freeing the instrument from the stillness of time. The loud tones shook the ground below my feet. The birds ceased their morning chorus, and the wind haunted as the earth froze. When the tolling quieted, reality rushed in, and I continued my retreat back to the farm. The beating I received from grandfather after crawling through the front door was unforgettable. Dark bruises and scars painted my pale skin like ink on canvas. The following morning was a mental and physical struggle just to get up. My body was tender, and the aches served as both a harsh reminder of the past and a morbid glimpse into the future. I made grandfather his breakfast of bacon and eggs, doing my best to avoid eye contact as he was nursing his third drink of the morning. When I made my way outside to begin my daily labors, 2 peculiarities took me by surprise. The first, and less strange, being that all of my chores were already finished. The second oddity was the gaunt man in a dusty suit standing completely still in the cornfield. I called for grandfather, and he stumbled from his recliner, drunk and annoyed. I pointed to the man in the field. Without saying a word, he made his way towards the man, and I followed behind, keeping my distance. Grandfather stopped a few feet from him. He was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen before. His long, bony limbs reminded me of crooked tree branches. His clothes were unusual, a charcoal-colored suit and matching hat. He reminded me of the men in the black and white films I fell asleep to at night. Grandfather called out to him and asked his business, but the man only smiled. His teeth were yellow and jagged. His eyes were beady and black. I never saw him blink despite the hot summer sun beaming down on his face. Grandfather inquired once more, and he was met with the same smiling silence yet again. Infuriated, grandfather threatened to shoot him if he did not leave his land. Hearing this, I spoke up and informed grandfather of the stranger's generous labor. Grandfather gave the man a confused look, which was quickly replaced once again with annoyance. I guess you were expecting payment for your work then? Is this your idea of an application? Grandfather asked. The man shook his head no, the permanent smile still plastered to his wrinkled face. Grandfather continued. Well then, what do you want, huh? The man slowly rubbed his flat belly in a circular motion. Grandfather beamed. Work for food? Now that's a deal I'll take any day. Come on back to my house, and the girl will whip you up something to eat. They strolled towards the house, and grandfather commended him. As the man turned, I noticed a deep, grotesque scar on his neck, oozing green liquid. The lattice pattern made it look as though he had once been cut in two and then sewn back together. I shivered in fear. I prepared a lunch of sandwiches and potatoes for grandfather and the mysterious guest. When I set the plates down, the man tore into the food like a starving animal. Within only a few seconds, he handed me the spotless plate. Amazed, I took it back and prepared another helping for him. Again, he ate it with ferocity. I looked to grandfather and asked him what I was to do. He responded with the back of his hand and barked for me to make him more. And so I did. 8 servings later, the bizarre, lanky man was finally satiated. After lunch, the man quietly rose from the table, walked outside, and disappeared into the woods. I rummaged through the kitchen for any leftover scraps. The next morning, the man completed the chores before I awoke, and again, I made him a meal of tremendous proportions. This routine continued for months, cooking and cleaning for grandfather and the gluttonous stranger. And still, he never spoke. As time went on, our food diminished, and my own hunger grew, both for food and freedom from the labor. On a cold, winter afternoon, our food finally ran out. The man had completed the daily chores and sat at the table ready to be served. I begged grandfather for grocery money and promised to be back quickly. Infuriated, he blamed me for the missing food and struck me over and over again until I was too dizzy to see straight. I stumbled out of the kitchen and began to lose consciousness. Just before I did, I saw the tall man rise from the table in anger as grandfather yelled to him. I said, "I ain't got no more food for ya." I awoke a few hours later to the smell of smoke, groggy and disoriented. I searched the house high and low, but grandafter and the man were missing. I stepped outside into the crisp air. The smoky smell was stronger. I followed it like a hound until it led me to a clearing in the woods. There I discovered the source. The tall man looked up, smiling at me with his sharp teeth and inkwell eyes. He stood near a fire and rotated a spit, roasting a corpse in the flames. I sat in silence and watched the tall man eat every last morsel of meat from grandfather's charred bones, just before slithering back into the ground, waiting for the dinner bell to ring once again. And I walked out of the woods, smiling, free for the first time in my life. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comments section.